with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very grateful that you would join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Today, Jordan Saley interviews Helena Fox. She is here to celebrate the quiet and the loud. Before we invite Jordan and Helena into the studios, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. Of course, we'd love for you also to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can download our free Reading With Your Kids online magazine. You can also check out our blog, find our Certified Great Read Wall of Fame. And if you are an author, you absolutely want to click the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to discover how you can be a guest here on the podcast. Also discover how you can submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Jordan, and today I'm joined by Helena Fox, who's here to talk about her upcoming book, The Quiet and the Loud. She's joining us from a library in Australia. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Jordan. It's lovely to be here.
In the library or on
It's lovely to be both. I love libraries with a passion, and then it's just really lovely to be talking to you.
Did you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, sure. The Quiet and the Loud is my second novel. It comes after my debut called How It Feels to Float. It's not a sequel, but it's like it's like a sister book to that book in that it explores, issues of complex trauma and how to navigate life as a young person and find your voice as a young person. So it's the story of George, who's 18 years old, and she's dealing with a pretty chaotic life. She's got a really loud household full of noisy family members, and then she's got a really dear friend. Her best friend is pregnant at the age of 19 and is managing a lot of anxiety with that. And then she's got another lovely friend called Laz, who's grappling with climate grief and climate anxiety. And in the middle of all of that, she also meets a young woman called Calliope, who she becomes instantly smitten with. And so there's just a lot going on in her life, and the way that she navigates that is by finding quiet in as many places as she can, by kayaking Sydney Harbour or running or swimming. And then all sorts of trouble ensues when her estranged father reaches out to her with some really devastating news, and fires start to burn around her city, and so she can't find the quiet that she needs. And it's what happens when you're faced with that challenge, when the noise becomes just a bit too loud. What do you do then? How do you manage the memories that come out of the woodwork? How do you manage your friends' needs? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you find quiet? How do you speak out when you need to speak out? So it's just a little bit of a conversation about those things.
Yeah, and How It Feels to Float was also a conversation about mental health and that stuff, right?
Yeah.
What made you, that was your debut book, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What made you start writing? What made that your first official story?
I think, I started off as a short story writer, and then I thought, novels, I'm going to have a go at a novel. And so I wrote one, and it was a collection of short stories, and it didn't work because it wasn't really a novel. And then I tried another draft of another novel, and that didn't quite work. And so this one was I was in the middle of actually a third project. And this is kind of the story of a lot of writers, is you write and you write and you write, and finally there's a project that says this is the one that you have that's working, and where you've got something to say that really matters to you. And so that novel just kind of came out of I'd been thinking about it for about 8 years or 6 years. I'd been tinkering with the voice of that, with this young woman called Biz. I'd been tinkering with that voice for a while, and it was after the death of a really, really dear close friend of mine that I think I understood the level of grief that Biz was experiencing. And then she just kind of marched in and said, "You're going to be writing my story." And it just came out so suddenly, and in the voice of this really enigmatic, fascinating young woman who I just felt like a friend by the end, and also had a lot of parts of me in it, because I live with a lot of mental health issues myself. And so it's just a way of kind of translating the things that have gone on in my mind into fiction, which makes your own story a bit more bearable. And then, so I just kind of wrote a story of someone navigating profound grief and serious mental health issues. And it just felt very real to me. So it just kind of poured out.
Yeah. How old were you when you first started trying to address mental health issues?
I was probably quite old. I think I was 30 before I really took it quite seriously. I had been told by people who loved me that perhaps it would be good for me to get mental health support for years before that. And I think there was a lot of shame in it, and there was a lot of fear. I don't want there to be something wrong with me, so I'll just push that away, and I'll just keep running on, adrenaline and willpower. And at some point, that doesn't always sustain you. Sometimes you need to talk about it, and you need to talk about it with a professional, and you need to talk about it with really safe people, and you need to kind of put aside that sense of secrecy and shame that you carry, that there's something wrong with you or that you're broken. Maybe there is something wrong, but it's not your fault. It's not something you need to apologize for. You're ill, and in the same way that if you had any kind of physical limitation or illness. So I've become quite a massive advocate for speaking out about these issues, and especially supporting young people as they find their voice in these areas, to say, yes, I live with insert whatever, disorder or illness that they live with. And I think it's important that they know that you can live with that and have a functional, joyful life. But it's a little bit easier if you are supported and can speak about these things. So, I was late to it, and I think that might be why I write so much about it for young people, because I've worked with a lot of young people who deserve help and support for their mental health, and deserve to get that at a younger age than 30. But it's never too late, I should also say.
For sure, yeah. I know, like, teenagers and young adults is where it is probably most discouraged. It's considered, like, weak to have mental health problems. They're like, oh, I can't do this because I'm anxious, or but it's also the time where people need it most, because that's when they're discovering themselves. That's like when their brain's starting to become fully developed and going through periods. So I remember, I think it was like Simone Biles. She went to the Olympics, but have her her medication that she was prescribed because it was in a different country where it was illegal, and so many people really bullied her for dropping out of the Olympics. Yes.
I think that kind of, that, and also the tennis player, I've blanked on her name because, but she said, it wasn't good for her mental health to do the interviews after the tennis matches. And people were like, oh, that's so selfish, or that's so indulgent. And it's like, no, she's advocating, she's speaking her boundaries. She's saying what she needs. She's saying what makes her feel better and what makes her feel worse. And the same with Simone Biles. It's like, we're allowed to speak out. We're allowed to say, this is where my limits are. This is what I can say yes to. This is what I can say no to. And that's absolutely what I'm exploring in my second book is, where are your limits? Like at some point you are allowed to speak them. You are allowed to look after yourself. And I think what I feel most strongly in is evidenced by things like Simone Biles and other people speaking out on behalf of their own mental health, is that you're allowed to love yourself. You're deserving of that. You're deserving of tremendous self-care. And it's not selfish and it's not weak to say, I deserve to look after myself. It's the oxygen mask analogy. You put the oxygen mask on yourself and then you can take care of the ones around you. And that's not selfish. So, yeah, I feel a sense of urgency about this because there's just so much going on in the world that causes a lot of distress in young people. And I think we're kind of taught to just push on and be resilient and just cover things up kind of almost with band-aids of, okay, well, I'll eat this one good meal or I'll have this one good sleep. And it's like, well, actually we need to do sustained self-care and we need to do sustained boundary making and sustained conversations about taking time to be still and to listen to your body and just time to say no when, we're encouraged so much to say yes, yes, yes to everything. So yeah, I have a few opinions about this.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, setting boundaries is something that's so underrated. Like my whole life, I was such like a yes man. Like I had to say yes to everything, and I ended up losing my mind at one point. And then that's when I discovered all this help for mental health. And it's so hard when you like love someone in relationships and family and stuff, like saying no to them or setting a boundary. But it's so necessary. And in that like sense, I feel bad for people like Simone Biles and celebrities who like suffer from like these mental illnesses because people feel like they are owed these things like interviews and to watch them do this and won't let people set boundaries.
I think that's something I also explore a lot is the idea of people pleasing, of just saying yes as a people pleasing mechanism and how that can actually be born quite a bit from trauma. So sometimes, we talk a lot about fight or flight as a response to trauma, but we don't often talk about fawn, which is that element of, a trauma response where you've been kind of almost conditioned to please others and be quiet and be obliging and be malleable. And we're kind of trained to cover up our own pain to make sure other people are happy. And I think celebrities and people who are, kind of performing pleasing activities, it's almost like no, whatever has happened before, whatever has happened to you, it's not as important as you being amenable and pleasing to others and saying the right thing and doing the right thing. And I think that is modeled in society, that we just make sure no one else is unhappy and we don't upset anyone by stating our needs. Even if it's not born from trauma, it's such a conditioning that we've been made to agree with. It's like, you don't have to say yes just because you feel you should. Make sure that it's the right decision in your own body with what feels right to you and what makes you feel well. If it doesn't make you feel well, then maybe you're people pleasing. Maybe you're actually doing something that isn't in service of yourself. And I'm not saying people should be mean or cruel or horrible in their no's, but I think a healthy no, and a decision to not do things simply to people please is is probably one of the biggest messages. Well, you know, I'm not on a soapbox. I don't have an agenda. It's more, I'm listening to myself, and these are things I've learned. And so I'd love to communicate that in some way.
Yeah. An article that I read that like taught me, like kind of helped me break out of my people pleasing cycle. It was like by some mental health account, and they were talking about how like you try to people please because you don't want to be selfish, you want to take care of others, but people pleasing on its own is a selfish act because you're doing all these things with like the subconscious need to be liked and to make other people happy. And so telling myself that it's like not selfish to want to do stuff like for myself and not for other people is like such a useful thing to have in my mind.
And I think also let's maybe break down the word selfish, because we have been taught that is one of the most negative words in our social vocabulary. Is to be selfish is to be, you know, let's insert all the other associated words, you know, greedy, lazy, manipulative, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, selfish is self-owning, self-prioritizing, self-caring. So I think if we can just kind of almost, there's a lot of negative words that we put on ourselves, especially when we're not feeling well. It's like, oh, it would be selfish of me to do this. It would be lazy. It would be, I'm broken. It would be weak. Let's take every single one of those words and maybe just dissolve them. Because it just feels to me like all of those words come in a social structure of expectation and the way we've just done things before. And so now it's like, oh, well, let's take selfish and dissolve it almost in water. And then let's pull out love, and let's pull out self-care, and let's take weak and dissolve that and turn that into rest and good kinds of quiet and advocating for ourselves. And, you know, all these words, let's just dissolve them and then pull out what is the most positive, what's the most nourishing, what's the most caring kind of interpretation of that, and maybe give ourselves a break.
Sure. Lazy is another big one that gets thrown around.
Yeah.
And I know so many kids who like work themselves to death because they are trying to work full time, do school full time, hold an internship, do a sport, and do all these things at once. And they feel like if they drop something, then they're being lazy. Or if they take time to watch one movie, then it's lazy.
Yeah. I think, I mean, if anything teaches us that, it's that's not a healthy or helpful word is what we've been dealing with the pandemic. Is there has been a lot of illness and a lot of stillness and a lot of lockdowns and a lot of quiet and a lot of people being profoundly unwell and staying profoundly unwell through this pandemic. And I think, and one of the things that I think I've seen a lot of in conversation about the pandemic is how vital rest is, how vital it is to be really very still as you recover from illness, because getting up and going straight away can cause all sorts of ongoing problems for your health. And so I'm, you know, it's kind of like, what is that the slow life? And obviously we can't all have a slow life, but I think we're allowed pauses and we're allowed, to watch that movie. I was talking with a really dear friend yesterday, and she said, I didn't do anything yesterday. I just watched movies. And I was like, well, you did do something yesterday. You rested and you watched movies. Like, it's not nothing. And it's also, it's not nothing to sit and read a book. It's not nothing to listen to a podcast. It's not nothing to sit in a garden and watch birds. So it's really, if we think of, if we dissolve the word lazy and then think, how did it nourish me? Even if it felt like nothing, it might have nourished you by quietening your mind for a moment. I don't know. I just feel like I'm a bit of just the quiet living, the restful living, even as you're being productive, can be really nourishing. So, yeah.
No,
and I'm not even very much of a meditator or I'm quite a busy person, but I'm finding those moments of stillness can be so healing for me. Mm-hmm. So big fan of rest and stillness.
When I was younger, I remember if I was like, oh, I did nothing yesterday, I was like, oh, I'm so unproductive and lazy. And like, I did nothing yesterday. Like, so excited.
I love the idea of knowing that you're doing nothing. Like, what if you sat there and you were like, I'm doing nothing. And then you just basked in that, and and all those intrusive thoughts of, oh, you should, it's like, oh yeah, let's put you to the side, and this, I'm not being, put you to the side. It's like this like little hustly crowd that's like trying to, down talk your joy. And it's like, no, I am going to sit, and I'm actually going to watch the ocean for a bit. I'm going to sit and I'm going to watch this show that makes me laugh. I'm going to sit with a cup of tea. I'm just going to be still for a moment. And I love, what if we relished in these things that, what if we upended everything and just went, yeah, no, there's joy here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What show is that for me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that brings me joy?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. All sorts of things can bring me joy. Sometimes, I'm sorry for the noise. There's actually a small child getting very sad in the library. I don't know if you can hear them. They've just been sad for a while.
I can vaguely hear them.
Okay, well, hopefully they'll find some book soon that makes them feel more cheerful.
Ambiance to the podcast. Yeah. In the background.
Yeah, she's in the library, and there's a small child who hates books who's been dragged to the library. Okay, so I don't actually have like a set show. I think that I have beloved shows that I will watch over and over. So New Girl for me is a big one. It's comfort food. Pretty much. I've watched that show, the entire series, three times all the way through with my daughter, and we can just quote the characters, and little glimpses of New Girl come up quite often in our TikTok streams, and so we'll be like, did you see that one today? But the funny thing that I just watched that is so outside my norm is there's a new Netflix show called Physical 100. I am not, and it was just, I think I was very sick watching it, and it was the only thing that my brain could really take in was some really strong people doing really physical things. It was almost like the opposite of what my body could do in the moment. Mm-hmm. And what touched me about this show, it wasn't actually the physical challenges, which were quite interesting, but was how kind everyone was to each other. It was a Korean show, and they were so respectful, and it was dubbed in English with American accents, but everyone was like, yeah, you go. Oh, that was great. How do they do that? Look at their muscles. They're amazing. I've looked up to them for years. And then so much just like congratulating after every challenge. And when people had lost, they were all hugging each other. And I just felt all warm in the cockles of my heart, because I thought it doesn't have to be horrible. They can be nice. You can be really nice and respectful to each other. And so I got my fave and I just watched them along, and I don't know, like, it's not something I would have ever normally clicked on, but it goes to show that sometimes when you're not well, there's something that your brain latches onto. And again, I thought, should I be watching this? Is this silly? It's not very intellectual. Should I be doing something more important with my brain? And I was like, no, I just want to watch these people push a ship across some sand and then congratulate each other when they've done it. It just was so uncomplicated for me to watch people being nice to each other and doing their best at something. So yeah, a funny thing that I wouldn't have thought would have been my show at all.
Do you watch that with your kid as well?
I watched that one in bed while having a fever of 104.
Oh, right. Yeah, probably a good idea.
So yeah. But yeah, no, I've watched, things like Schitt's Creek and New Girl and Parks and Rec and all those kinds of shows are probably my fave.
You're speaking my language. I love those 3 shows.
Yeah.
I used to watch those with my mom all the time.
Yeah. It's such a thing. It's such a lovely thing to then have the memory of watching things like that with people you love.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah.
So did you, when writing this book or How It Feels to Float, did you like base anything off of your kid or kids? Not sure how many, but.
Oh, I have two kids and they're older now.
Mm-hmm.
I think I work with a lot of young people as a mentor, as a creative writing mentor. Mm-hmm. And my kids and I have a really, really beautiful relationship, a really close one as well. So I didn't base anything off the people I knew so much as I checked with my kids and I checked with the young people that I work with to make sure that I didn't sound ridiculous. It was just, in conversation, it was like, do you use, is this how you would say it? Is this how this would, and there's a lot of just conversations that I have in real life with young people about their mental health and about how they see the world. And I think that that slipped into the book is like young people worry about their future. Young people worry about the climate crisis. Young people worry about their place in their relationships with other people, whether they fit, whether they'll be rejected, whether they're going to be loved or loved enough. And so these are all conversations that I've had with young people for the last 15 years. And so that just comes into the book very much. And then I also tapped into myself, my own feelings about the world, and I don't feel very far away from my younger self. I feel very connected to the young person who was always new at school and struggled with popularity and struggled with, advocating for myself and lived with, I have complex PTSD from childhood. And so I struggle with that. And, so all of that kind of informed my books quite closely as well.
Sure.
Is my own lived experiences.
Mm. I appreciate you checking in with the kids to make sure that nothing sounds stupid, because I hate, have you seen the new reboot of Gossip Girl?
No, I haven't. Oh dear.
They tried so hard to capture how kids talk today, and I know I'm not a kid anymore, but I was like, I know that's wrong.
And that's so hard because it's that classic meme, Steve Buscemi, what's up, kids? He's there with his skateboard and his backwards cap, and he's trying to be hip and cool. And the great fear that you come across that way in your writing. And but I think the thing is, as a writer, if you have absolute, genuine respect for the community that you're writing for, and a connection to that community, whether it's young people, the LGBTQIA community, community of people living with mental health issues, if you're authentic in every interaction that you have, and if those voices are voices that you deeply want to amplify, then if you do the work of checking that, within those communities that you've got it right, then I think that authenticity shines through. And I think maybe the problem with some of those new shows might be that they've rushed there in order to kind of cash in on a brand or an idea. They might have rushed through those checks, those authenticity checks. And that's a bit disappointing, because it's it's these shows are so beloved. So it's take that time if you can. But maybe they thought they did take that time I don't know, it'd be interesting to talk to the show creators to see.
I don't know, maybe they were just talking to a different breed of kids than I knew.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I watch shows sometimes and it's like, oh, I don't know kids like that who are doing that. Maybe because I'm interacting so much with like a certain kind of, I interact with a lot of young writers. And so, maybe maybe we're all quite similar. But yeah.
So we are reaching the end of our time, but I did want to ask, if families were to read this together, what kind of conversations do you hope they could have?
I think what I'd want first to do is make sure that they read the trigger warnings, the content warnings, to make sure that it's not going to put any young person or anyone really into a harder space than they're already in. So I do address some pretty heavy topics, especially, book 1 addresses some really, really hard stuff in terms of depression and anxiety. And the second book touches on domestic violence and complex PTSD and addiction. Mm-hmm. And so first, I'd look at those content warnings and then travel gently through the book. And if there's a moment where something is more challenging, I'd say, all right, well, what did we think about that moment? What do we think these characters are feeling and thinking? And just practice compassion as you read, because, reading teaches us compassion anyway. And so just conversations about those topics. So say there's a moment of a heavier or harder moment for the main character or for the friends in the family in the book, then it's worth sitting down and going, how do you think they were feeling, and how would you respond, do you think? And if you disagree with someone's behavior, I know I've got in this The Quiet and the Loud, there's a character who's quite demanding. In her anxiety, she's become quite hyper-controlling and demanding. And some people have gone, it's frustrating that she's being like that. But I think it's so important to understand the source of that behavior. What might have caused that? What would it be like to feel that anxiety? Where does it come from? I have a lot of feelings about people who behave poorly. I think about, where did that fear come from? Where did that anger come from? Where did that pervasive anxiety come from? Where did that conflict avoidance come from? So those would be conversations that would be worth having, is I wonder where that came from, that behavior, or I wonder what they're feeling right now, and just extending compassion for every single person in the book, even as they're making mistakes and fumbling. And I have such loving feelings for my characters, probably because I know the kind of pain that a lot of them are in. And so it's me just trying to say, hey, this is what this kind of can feel like, this kind of pain or grief or anxiety. And here's a window into that. So if you want to talk about that with compassion, maybe that'll help you the next time you meet someone who's struggling.
Yeah, for sure. And that's such an important way to go through life. Mm. There's so many cases where you hear about the high school bully who actually had a really bad home life.
Mm. And I having said that, nothing excuses, like if you do something cruel to someone or malicious, or if you've done something wrong by someone, you do need to own it. You can't say, my illness made me do it, or, I've had a hard life and so that makes this behavior okay. The other thing that my book explores a lot is owning the harm you've done. For sure. And taking responsibility for it, and then moving forward in a space of honesty is also a really important subject, I guess, that I think that people should talk about, is owning, owning the two things at once. Yeah, owning an illness, owning the things that might have led you to do certain behaviors. And then also loving yourself through that. So a lot of self-compassion and a lot of just honesty.
Yeah, I've seen way too many people use it as a crutch, like saying like, oh, well, I was anxious, so I did X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, you need to apologize and own it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one because I know that I have had moments of being hyper controlling and very, very anxious and haven't been my best self. And I do understand it. So there's a lot of, it's like I'm constantly reassuring myself that, it's okay, you're okay. And also saying to someone, if I've hurt them, I am very sorry that I did that. There is a reason for it. It's not an excuse. And I love you. So just a lot, it's a nuanced thing, isn't it? We can use it as a crutch. It is an excuse, but it's not, it's complicated. We're messy people. We're messy things, we humans. But I think just being really genuine and being really, really kind as much as possible is the way through.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I like this note that we're leaving off on.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for asking me on. I really have loved this chat.
And thank you to everyone for listening to today's episode, and we will see you tomorrow for the next episode.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and we hope you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Until then, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Helena Fox. Please be sure to check out her latest book. It is The Quiet and the Loud. Also want to thank our guest host for today, Jordan Saley. I want to thank my entire team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Monica Rivera Sosa, Madison Dairies, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.